Zhao Chunli. Zhao Chunli was a 66-year-old Chinese immigrant who had worked as a farm worker in the Half Moon Bay area of California for many years. He lived and worked at California Terra Garden, formerly known as a mountain mushroom farm, alongside 34 other employees. Many of these workers were migrants from China and Mexico who labored long hours in difficult conditions. On January 23, 2023, at approximately 2:20 in the afternoon, Zhao arrived at California Terra Garden driving a maroon SUV. He was armed with a legally owned Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol that he had purchased through proper channels. Within minutes of arriving, Zhao shot 4 co-workers, resulting in their immediate passings while critically wounding a 5th person. After the shooting at California Terra Garden, Zhao drove approximately 2 miles to a second location called Concord Farms. At this second farm, he shot and ended the lives of 3 more people. There were individuals present at the second site who witnessed the events, but were not physically harmed during the attack. The entire tragic sequence of events at both farm locations unfolded over a matter of minutes. When investigators looked into Zhao's background and possible motivations, they uncovered a history of workplace grievances that had been building over an extended period. Zhao had told people that he felt bullied at work and believed he was being treated unfairly by supervisors who he felt singled him out. He had also expressed complaints about being required to work excessively long hours without adequate compensation or rest periods. One specific incident that bothered him was a dispute over a $100 repair bill for a forklift that had been damaged in a collision with a co-worker's bulldozer. Zhao shot the supervisor who demanded the payment, and the specific co-worker involved in the collision first. One of the victims at California Terra Garden had been Zhao's supervisor with whom he had this dispute, and this connection suggested the attack may have been specifically targeted. Court records revealed that Zhao had a history of concerning behavior dating back to 2013 that should have raised alarms. During an incident that year, Zhao had attempted to suffocate a roommate and had threatened that person with a knife. These past incidents demonstrated a pattern of responding to conflicts with threats of harm. At approximately 4:40 in the afternoon, roughly 2 hours after the shootings began, Zhao drove to the San Mateo County Sheriff's substation in Half Moon Bay. He parked his vehicle in the parking lot and waited for deputies to approach him. When deputies arrested him, Zhao did not resist and surrendered peacefully. His pistol was found inside the vehicle he had been driving. During questioning by investigators, Zhao expressed remorse for what he had done. He acknowledged his actions and did not deny his role in the events that had occurred. Zhao was charged with 7 counts of first-degree offenses, 1 count of attempted offense, firearm enhancements, and a multiple offense special circumstance. He pleaded not guilty on February 17, 2023. A grand jury indicted him on January 19, 2024. In June 2025, San Mateo County District Attorney Stephen Wagstaff announced the intention to seek the death penalty, citing the severity and calculated nature of the acts. As of September 2025, the trial remained pending, with proceedings scheduled for 2026. A gag order has been placed on the case, and the process of narrowing down judge selections was underway. Among the victims, 5 were Chinese nationals, and their families expressed condemnation of the acts through China's consulate in San Francisco. The Chinese government issued statements expressing sympathy for the victims' families and concern about the safety of Chinese citizens working in the United States. One survivor, Pedro Felix Romero Perez, who was shot 5 times during the attack at California Terra Garden, later gave media interviews describing the terror of what had occurred and the struggle to recover from his injuries. His testimony provided crucial details about the sequence of events and helped investigators understand how the attack had unfolded. From California farms to Colorado nightlife, the next case would reveal hatred targeting an entire community. Anderson Lee Aldrich. Anderson Lee Aldrich was 22 years old when events unfolded on November 19, 2022 at Club Q, an establishment in Colorado Springs that served as a gathering place for the community. The venue had been operating for years as a safe space, and the night in question was the eve of Transgender Day of Remembrance. Just before midnight, Aldrich entered Club Q carrying an AR-15 style rifle equipped with a 60-round drum magazine, a handgun, additional ammunition, and body armor. He began firing immediately upon entry, and the attack lasted 38 seconds before patrons were able to subdue him. During those seconds, 5 people lost their lives, and 25 were injured, with 17 of those injuries resulting specifically from gunshot wounds, while the remaining 8 were injured during the chaotic struggle to flee or subdue the shooter. Witnesses reported that Aldrich yelled hateful language during the attack. Aldrich's background revealed a troubled upbringing marked by family instability and isolation. He had been raised by his grandparents after difficulties with his mother made that necessary, and this separation from his biological parents appeared to have affected him. At 15, Aldrich had legally changed his name to distance himself from his father, who had been an MMA fighter and had worked in adult entertainment, suggesting a desire to separate from that family connection. Aldrich had identified as non-binary and used they/them pronouns, though investigators questioned whether this identification was genuine or a strategic claim made in anticipation of legal proceedings. During his time in school, Aldrich had reportedly been subjected to targeting based on perceptions about his identity, which may have contributed to his isolation. Prior to the Club Q attack, there had been warning signs that authorities had encountered but failed to act upon effectively. In 2021, Aldrich had been involved in a situation involving threats regarding explosives and had held family members in a standoff that lasted hours. However, the 21 bomb threat case was dismissed because the prosecution failed to serve subpoenas to the victims, Aldrich's mother and grandparents, in a timely manner, which prevented the case from proceeding to trial before the legal deadline. This dismissal meant that red flag laws were not triggered to prevent future access to weapons, despite clear evidence of dangerous behavior. Colorado had red flag legislation in place, but it requires someone to petition for enforcement, and no such petition was filed in Aldrich's case. When investigators searched Aldrich's residence after the attack, they discovered rainbow-colored shooting targets, suggesting the attack had been specifically planned against the community. They also found evidence of Aldrich's involvement in operating websites with content that promoted harmful ideologies. The response from patrons inside Club Q prevented even more casualties and demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. Navy officer Thomas James grabbed the rifle despite being shot twice during the attempt, enduring significant pain to prevent Aldrich from continuing to fire. Army veteran Richard Fierro helped disarm Aldrich and struck him repeatedly with a handgun to prevent him from continuing, using training from his military service to respond effectively. A transgender woman named Drea Norman also participated in subduing Aldrich by stomping on his head, ensuring he remained incapacitated until police could arrive. Police arrived within minutes of being called and took Aldrich into custody, finding him already subdued by the patrons who had risked their lives. Aldrich was charged with 305 counts, including offenses resulting in loss of life and hate-related enhancements. In June 2023, Aldrich entered guilty pleas to state charges and received 5 life sentences, plus 2,211 years. In June 2024, Aldrich reached a federal plea deal to avoid the death penalty, resulting in a sentence of 55 concurrent life sentences plus 190 years to be served in federal custody. Because guilty pleas were entered, no full trial took place. Richard Fierro, one of the veterans who subdued Aldrich, later described his response as entering combat mode. Matthew Haynes, a co-owner of Club Q, spoke publicly about the need for meaningful action beyond expressions of sympathy. From targeting a specific community to targeting an entire neighborhood based on prejudice. Peyton S. Gendron. Peyton S. Gendron was 18 years old and living in Conklin, New York, when he carried out an attack on May 14, 2022. He drove 200 miles to reach a top supermarket located in a predominantly black neighborhood in Buffalo. The supermarket served as a central shopping location for the surrounding community. Gendron arrived at the supermarket at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, carrying a modified Bushmaster XM15 rifle. He wore tactical gear and he had mounted a camera to his helmet to live stream the attack on the platform Twitch. He fired approximately 50 rounds in total, according to forensic analysis of the shell casings recovered from the scene. Gendron had been a college student before the attack. Investigation into his background revealed that he had spent significant time on internet forums, particularly on 4chan's political discussion board, where he had been exposed to and eventually embraced ideologies centered on white supremacy. There had been a prior incident in 2021 when Gendron had made threats at his school that resulted in him being placed under mental health observation. However, following that observation period, no red flag seizure of potential weapons was implemented. Gendron had written an extensive manifesto totaling 180 pages that detailed his beliefs and planning. Much of this document was plagiarized from writings associated with the person who carried out the Christchurch incident in New Zealand, showing how harmful ideologies spread across borders. In the manifesto, Gendron outlined beliefs centered on what is known as the Great Replacement Theory, which falsely claims that certain demographic groups are being systematically replaced through immigration and birth rate changes. Gendron explicitly stated that his goal was to terrorize non-white people, and that he had chosen the Buffalo location specifically because of its demographics and the high concentration of black residents in that particular neighborhood. He had researched the area extensively and selected the top supermarket because it served as a central gathering place for the community he intended to target. After the shooting, Gendron briefly aimed his rifle at his own neck, but then lowered it and surrendered to police who had arrived at the scene. He was taken into custody without further incident. Gendron entered guilty pleas to state charges in November 2022, avoiding a lengthy trial process. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of release in February 2023 during proceedings attended by victims' families. At his sentencing, Gendron stated that he had done a terrible thing and that he had acted out of hate, acknowledging the racist motivations that had driven his actions. The sheriff described the incident as a racially motivated hate offense that had targeted a community based solely on the color of their skin. Family members of victims gave impact statements describing how the loss had devastated their lives and communities. In January 2024, federal authorities announced their intention to pursue maximum federal penalties against Gendron. A federal capital trial is scheduled for August 2026, where the Department of Justice has officially announced it will seek the death penalty for the hate-motivated attack. From calculated hatred to the confusion of untreated mental health conditions. Ahmad al-Alawi Alyssa. Ahmad al-Alawi Alyssa was 21 years old on March 22, 2021, when he entered a King Soopers supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. He arrived at approximately 2:30 in the afternoon with a Ruger AR-556 pistol technically a short-barreled rifle platform, that he had purchased 6 days before the incident at a gun store in Arvada. Over the course of approximately 1 hour, Alyssa fired the weapon inside the store, resulting in 10 people losing their lives. Alyssa was born in Syria and moved to the United States with his family in 2002. He was a naturalized U.S. citizen. During his high school years, he had been subjected to targeting by peers, and this experience appeared to have affected him significantly. Following high school, Alyssa began displaying behaviors that suggested paranoid thinking. In 2018, he had been convicted of an incident involving physical confrontation. The investigation into Alyssa's motivations proved challenging because his stated reasons were unclear and appeared disconnected from reality. Mental health professionals who evaluated him determined that he was experiencing schizophrenia. Unlike some other cases, there was no evidence that political beliefs or organized ideologies had played a role in his actions. During the incident, police officers arrived and engaged with Alyssa. He sustained a gunshot wound to his thigh during this engagement. After being shot, Alyssa surrendered to police, stating at the time that he surrendered and describing himself as not wearing clothing. He was taken into custody and received medical treatment for his wound. The legal proceedings in Alyssa's case were complicated by questions about his competency to stand trial that delayed justice for years. He was initially found incompetent, and proceedings were delayed while he received treatment aimed at restoring his competency through prescribed interventions and monitoring. Mental health professionals worked with Alyssa over an extended period to address the symptoms that were preventing him from understanding the legal proceedings against him. After a period of treatment, evaluators determined that he had been restored to competency and could understand the proceedings against him, the roles of various court personnel, and the charges he faced. The competency restoration process took multiple years, during which victims' families waited for the case to proceed. Following a trial in September 2024, Alyssa was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 1,334 years for the 38 counts of attempted murder and other charges. The sentencing brought a measure of closure to families who had waited over 3 years for the legal process to conclude. Families of the victims expressed frustration with how long the legal process had taken due to the competency issues. They felt that the delays had prolonged their grief and prevented them from achieving closure. From individual mental health struggles to long-simmering workplace resentments. Samuel James Cassidy. Samuel James Cassidy was 57 years old and had worked for the Valley Transportation Authority in San Jose, California for many years. On May 26, 2021, during a shift change at the rail yard where he was employed, Cassidy was armed with 3 semi-automatic 9mm handguns and 32 high-capacity magazines, which are illegal in California. He also had a Molotov cocktail-style device found at the scene that failed to ignite. During the attack, Cassidy fired 39 rounds and killed 9 co-workers. A 10th person, Cassidy himself, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. What made this case particularly unusual was that Cassidy had also set his own home on fire at approximately the same time the rail yard attack was occurring. This simultaneous arson suggested significant planning and indicated that Cassidy had not intended to return home. Cassidy's background revealed a person with documented anger management difficulties. His ex-wife later provided information to investigators, indicating that Cassidy had frequently expressed hatred toward his co-workers. She stated that he had specifically talked about harming people at his workplace. These statements demonstrated that Cassidy's intentions had been communicated to at least one person prior to the attack. In 2016, U.S. Customs and Border Protection CBP, detained Cassidy upon his return from the Philippines, discovering books on terrorism and explosives, as well as a memo book expressing his hatred for the VTA. During questioning, he also admitted to having dark thoughts about his colleagues. Despite these warnings during an official interaction with federal authorities, the information was not shared with local police or the VTA, nor did it prompt any action or monitoring by his employer. This lack of communication between agencies represented a critical breakdown that prevented potential intervention. When law enforcement personnel arrived at the rail yard and began approaching Cassidy's location after receiving reports of the attack, he ended his own life. Because he passed away at the scene, there was no arrest, no trial, and no opportunity to question him directly about his specific motivations, beyond what could be inferred from his history. The district attorney later stated that if authorities had been alerted to the information from the 2016 detention, there would have been sufficient grounds to pursue intervention measures. This statement highlighted how information that was known to some parties had not been shared with others who could have acted on it. Investigation of Cassidy's home after the fire revealed an extensive collection of weapons and ammunition that suggested long-term accumulation and planning. The arsenal indicated planning that had occurred over months or potentially years, with evidence suggesting he had been systematically acquiring materials. Investigators found that Cassidy had stored ammunition in various locations and had apparently prepared for the attack with significant forethought about logistics. The simultaneous arson at his home suggested he had not only planned the rail yard attack, but had also ensured that evidence would be destroyed. From workplace hatred to claims of targeting sources of personal struggle. Robert Aaron Long. Robert Aaron Long was 21 years old on March 16, 2021, when he carried out attacks at 3 locations in the Atlanta area. The attacks resulted in 8 deaths and 1 survivor, Elcias Hernandez Ortiz. The victims included 6 women of Asian descent, 1 white woman, and 1 white man. Long used a 9mm 92 FS handgun that he had purchased from Big Woods Goods in Holly Springs just hours before the first shooting began. Long had been raised in a conservative Baptist family environment. He had sought treatment at a facility called Hope Quest that addresses what is described as problematic behaviors related to intimate relationships. Long later claimed that he had viewed the spa businesses as sources of temptation that he wanted to eliminate from his life. The attacks began in Cherokee County at a spa business and then continued at 2 additional locations in Atlanta proper, all within a relatively short time frame. The fact that all 3 targeted businesses offered similar services suggested that Long had specifically chosen these locations rather than acting randomly or impulsively. 6 of the 8 victims were women of Asian descent, leading prosecutors and advocacy groups to question Long's stated motivations about eliminating temptation. The timing and target selection suggested planning that had occurred over at least days, if not longer, contradicting any notion of impulsive action. Law enforcement was able to track Long through his vehicle after the attacks. A chase ensued, and Long was eventually apprehended without further incident. During questioning, Long maintained that his actions were about eliminating what he perceived as temptation rather than being motivated by racial bias. However, prosecutors in Fulton County argued that race and gender had played significant roles in Long's selection of targets, despite his claims otherwise. The demographic pattern of the victims suggested targeting that went beyond Long's stated claims about personal struggles with temptation. Prosecutors pointed to the fact that 6 of the 8 victims were Asian women, arguing that this pattern could not be coincidental, given the number of similar businesses in the Atlanta area with different demographic compositions. The district attorney stated publicly that race and gender had played a part in the selection of targets, directly contradicting Long's stated motivations. In Cherokee County, Long entered guilty pleas and received 4 life sentences in 2021, resolving charges for the first location he attacked. These pleas resolved the charges related to the first location without requiring a trial that would have extended proceedings for years. However, the case in Fulton County remained pending, with prosecutors announcing their intention to pursue maximum penalties, including charges with hate-related enhancements. As of late 2025, the Fulton County case remains in a pre-trial phase. District Attorney Fani Willis continues to seek the death penalty and hate crime enhancements, while the defense has focused on the fact that Long is already serving 4 consecutive life sentences from the Cherokee County plea. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From disputed motivations to delusions that no one could ignore, the cases that followed would show how untreated conditions can spiral toward tragedy. Robert Card. Robert Card was a 40-year-old Army reservist living in Maine when events unfolded on October 25, 2023. He had served in the military for years and held a role as a grenade instructor, a position that required specific training and responsibilities. Those who knew Card described him as someone who had generally been quiet and had not exhibited concerning behavior for most of his life. However, beginning in 2023, Card's mental condition began deteriorating rapidly in ways that alarmed his family members and those who knew him well. Medical professionals who later examined evidence from Card's case determined that he had likely sustained traumatic brain injuries from repeated exposure to explosive blasts during his military training as a grenade instructor. These injuries appeared to have triggered delusions and auditory experiences that Card interpreted as real voices and accusations against him. The deterioration was rapid and dramatic, transforming a previously stable individual into someone experiencing severe psychiatric symptoms. Card began believing that businesses in his community were spreading false accusations about him, specifically that they were labeling him with extremely serious and damaging allegations that had no basis in reality. These beliefs were not based in reality, but were products of his deteriorating mental state. Family members tried to get Card help and reported their concerns to military authorities, but the interventions that were attempted proved insufficient. On October 25, 2023, Card went to 2 locations in Lewiston, Maine. He first entered the Just-in-Time Recreation Bowling Alley at approximately 6:56 p.m. and then traveled to Skimmingee's Bar and Grill, where the second shooting occurred approximately 12 minutes later. Card was carrying a Ruger S-FAR rifle, and he used it to shoot at people in both locations. 18 people lost their lives, and 13 others sustained injuries during the attacks. After the shootings, Card fled the scenes, and a massive manhunt was launched across Maine. Law enforcement agencies from across the state and region participated in searching for Card over a period of days. The manhunt ended when Card was found deceased inside a trailer, having taken his own life. Because Card passed away before being apprehended, there was no trial or formal legal proceedings against him. Instead, authorities focused on understanding what had happened and what could have been done differently. An independent commission was established to investigate the circumstances leading to the tragedy and to identify what could have been done differently. The commission's report identified multiple missed opportunities to intervene in Card's deteriorating mental state, including failures by military officials to act on family warnings and failures by local authorities to utilize existing procedures. The report documented how Card's family had repeatedly expressed concerns about his mental state and had sought help from military authorities. But these warnings were not acted upon with sufficient urgency. A neurologist who examined evidence related to Card's brain condition stated that brain injury had likely played a significant role in his actions and in the delusions he experienced. In 2025, Survivors and families of victims filed a lawsuit against the United States Army alleging negligence in how they handled CARD's mental health concerns and failed to prevent the tragedy. The lawsuit argues that military officials were aware of CARD's deteriorating condition and failed to take adequate steps to prevent him from accessing weapons or harming others in the community. An Army report also acknowledged multiple failures in how the situation had been handled. Some forensic details from CARD's evaluation were redacted from public release in 2025, limiting full understanding of his mental state. From military systems that failed to act to a family that failed to see the warning signs. Robert E. Crimo III. Robert E. Crimo III was 21 years old on July 4, 2022, when he carried out an attack during an Independence Day parade in Highland Park, Illinois. Highland Park is an affluent suburb north of Chicago, and the parade was a traditional community celebration that drew families and residents from across the area. Crimo had grown up in Highland Park, in a family marked by instability and conflict. His father had run for mayor of the town at one point, but had faced legal issues. Crimo had dropped out of high school and had pursued an online presence as a rapper, creating music and videos that contained imagery depicting harm. Crimo's online activity also showed exposure to content from forums like 4chan that mix ironic humor with darker themes. One expert later described Crimo as existing in a bubble of irony and sadness that characterized certain online spaces. While Crimo showed interest in content associated with extremist ideologies, investigators found no specific bias or clear ideological motivation for the attack. What was clear was that Crimo had planned the attack for weeks in advance, researching locations and preparing his approach. He had scouted the parade route and identified the rooftop position that would give him the vantage point he desired. He positioned himself on a rooftop overlooking the parade route and waited for the event to begin, showing patience and calculation in his actions. When the parade was underway and the street below was filled with attendees, including families with young individuals, Crimo opened fire from his elevated position without warning. He fired 83 rounds into the crowd below in a sustained attack that created chaos and terror. 7 people lost their lives as a result of the shooting, and 48 others sustained injuries from gunfire or from the chaos that ensued as people tried to escape the scene. The scene was one of confusion and terror, as what had been a festive celebration filled with music and floats turned into a nightmare with people running in all directions. Emergency responders arrived to find victims scattered along the parade route, and the community's Independence Day celebration was transformed into one of the darkest days in Highland Park's history. The attacks shattered the sense of safety that had characterized the affluent suburb and left lasting trauma on survivors and witnesses. After carrying out the attack, Crimo left the rooftop and attempted to flee the area. He disguised himself as a woman in an attempt to blend in with people fleeing the scene. However, law enforcement quickly identified Crimo as the person responsible through witness accounts and surveillance footage. A manhunt was launched, and Crimo was apprehended later that day. During a phone call while in custody, Crimo made references to the attack being a false flag, suggesting a disconnect from reality or an attempt to deflect responsibility. Crimo's father faced legal consequences for his role in enabling his son to obtain weapons. The father had sponsored Crimo's application despite knowing about concerning behaviors, and he pleaded guilty to misdemeanors related to this sponsorship. In June 2024, Crimo entered guilty pleas to 7 counts of first-degree murder and 48 counts of aggravated battery. He was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of 2025, Crimo remains incarcerated in Illinois, serving these sentences. From unclear motivations to motivations steeped in explicit hatred. Ryan Christopher Palmater. Ryan Christopher Palmater was 21 years old on August 26, 2023, when he entered a Dollar General store in Jacksonville, Florida. The store was located in a predominantly black neighborhood, and this location was not coincidental. Prior to going to the Dollar General, Palmiter had driven to the campus of a historically black college and university, but had been turned away by security personnel. Palmiter had grown up in Florida, though detailed information about his early childhood remains limited in public records. What is known is that in 2017, when he was 15 years old, Palmiter had been placed under a mental health hold, indicating that concerns about his well-being had been recognized by authorities at that time. However, this hold did not prevent him from later accessing weapons. In his manifestos, Palmiter explicitly referenced the 2022 Buffalo supermarket shooter as an inspiration, mirroring the Great Replacement rhetoric found in that perpetrator's writings and expressing admiration for their actions. The manifestos made clear that Palmiter's motivations were rooted in racism and that he had specifically targeted black people as his intended victims. The writings demonstrated significant time spent consuming extremist content and developing a worldview centered on racial animosity. On the day of the attack, Palmiter was carrying an AR-15 style rifle that had swastikas painted on it, leaving no ambiguity about the ideological foundations of his actions. He entered the Dollar General store and began shooting at customers and employees. 3 people, Angela Michelle Carr, Anolt Joseph A.J. Laguerre Jr., and Gerald Deshaun Gallion, lost their lives in the attack. All were black individuals, targeted specifically because of their race. After carrying out the shootings, Palmiter went to an office area within the store and ended his own life. Because he passed away at the scene, there was no opportunity for law enforcement to question him or for legal proceedings to take place. President Biden issued a statement following the attack condemning white supremacy and stating that such ideologies have no place in American society or communities. The attack was classified as a hate offense given the clear racial targeting, the manifestos Palmiter had left behind, and the symbols he had displayed on his weapon. Civil rights organizations and community leaders spoke out about the attack as an example of how online radicalization can lead to real-world harm directed at specific communities. In 2025, families of the victims filed a wrongful passing lawsuit against the Dollar General Corporation. The lawsuit alleges that the store had inadequate security measures despite being aware of the risk of targeted attacks. The case remains ongoing, with no resolution as of late 2025. Palmiter gave no interviews before passing, leaving only his written manifestos as explanations for his actions. His case represents one of several recent incidents where individuals radicalized through online spaces carried out attacks motivated by racial hatred. From one form of hatred to another, equally destructive ideology. Mauricio Garcia. Mauricio Garcia was 33 years old on May 6, 2023, when he carried out an attack at Allen Premium Outlets, a shopping complex in Allen, Texas. The mall was busy with weekend shoppers and families when Garcia arrived. Garcia had been born in Texas and had served briefly in the United States Army before being discharged in 2008 due to concerns about his mental fitness for service. In the years following his military discharge, Garcia became increasingly involved in online communities that promoted ideologies centered on white supremacy and hatred of other groups. Garcia had made numerous posts online, praising historical figures associated with genocidal regimes. His social media activity indicated deep immersion in neo-Nazi ideology and suggested he viewed individuals who had carried out similar attacks as role models. On the day of the attack, Garcia wore a patch on his tactical vest that read RWDS, an acronym standing for Right-Wing Death Squad, which is a slogan used by white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups. Evidence later showed that Garcia had visited the Allen Premium Outlets multiple times in the weeks before the attack, apparently scouting the location and planning his approach. This pattern of reconnaissance suggested careful planning rather than an impulsive act. Garcia arrived at the outlets carrying an AR-15 style rifle and began shooting at people in the parking lot and outside the stores without warning or provocation. 8 people lost their lives in the attack, and 7 others sustained injuries requiring medical treatment. Among the victims was the Cho family, including both parents and their 3-year-old son, though their 6-year-old son survived the attack as the sole remaining member of his immediate family. The victims ranged in demographics and backgrounds, united only by their presence at a popular shopping destination on what should have been an ordinary weekend day. A police officer who was at the outlets for an unrelated matter heard the gunfire and responded immediately. The officer engaged Garcia and shot him, ending the attack. Garcia passed away at the scene from the wounds he sustained during the confrontation with police. Because Garcia did not survive, there was no trial or opportunity to question him about his specific motivations, beyond what could be gleaned from his online activity. While Garcia was discharged from the Army due to mental health concerns, this information did not appear in the National Instant Criminal Background Check system because there was no formal court-ordered adjudication of mental illness, allowing him to pass background checks. This raised questions about gaps in background check systems. Officials described Garcia as having neo-Nazi ideation that had clearly influenced his decision to carry out the attack. Analysts who studied the case noted what they termed ideological fuzziness in Garcia's beliefs, suggesting he had absorbed various extremist ideas without necessarily being part of an organized movement. This pattern has become increasingly common in cases involving lone actors who radicalize online. From hatred directed outward to despair directed at systems themselves. Connor Sturgeon. Connor Sturgeon was 25 years old and working as an employee at Old National Bank in Louisville, Kentucky, when events unfolded on April 10, 2023. The bank was located in downtown Louisville and served as Sturgeon's workplace, where he had been employed for a period of time. Sturgeon had grown up in Louisville and had been a star athlete during his school years, excelling in sports and academics. He had sustained multiple concussions during his athletic career, and there was later speculation about whether these head injuries had contributed to his mental health struggles by causing changes in brain function or chemistry. Sturgeon's parents stated that while he was being treated for depression and panic attacks, they characterized his mental health challenges as having been previously manageable until a sudden decline in the week leading up to the attack. This type of depression is particularly challenging because it does not respond to typical approaches that help most people with similar conditions. In the time before the attack, Sturgeon had been experiencing panic attacks and had been struggling with his mental state. His parents later revealed that they had been taking him to see a psychiatrist and were actively trying to help him get treatment. On the morning of April 10th, they had plans to take him to another appointment after work that day. What made Sturgeon's case particularly unusual was that he appeared to have a stated goal beyond personal grievance or hatred toward his co-workers. Notes found after the attack indicated that Sturgeon wanted to draw attention to how easily he had been able to access weapons, despite his documented mental health struggles and ongoing psychiatric treatment. He had written about wanting to impact change regarding weapon access policies and had explicitly stated this as part of his motivation for what he was planning. On social media, Sturgeon had posted statements suggesting that people would not listen to words or peaceful advocacy and questioning whether they would hear a different kind of message delivered through action. These writings suggested a calculated decision to use the attack as a form of protest or statement. On the morning of April 10th, before the bank opened to the public for business, Sturgeon arrived carrying an AR-15 rifle that he had purchased legally. He began shooting inside the bank at his workplace, targeting co-workers and others who were present. 5 people lost their lives, and 8 others sustained injuries during the attack. Investigators later determined that Sturgeon had fired over 40 rounds during the incident. Police responded rapidly to reports of an active situation at the bank. When officers arrived and entered the building, a shootout occurred between police and Sturgeon. Sturgeon was struck by police gunfire and passed away at the scene. In the aftermath, Sturgeon's parents spoke publicly about their son's mental health struggles and their devastation over what had occurred at the bank. They described being racked with grief and confusion about how their son could have carried out such an act despite their efforts to get him help and their active involvement in his treatment. They recounted the mental health struggle he had been facing and their attempts to support him through psychiatric treatment, including taking time off work to accompany him to appointments. The parents expressed that they had been doing everything they knew how to do to help their son, but that the system had not provided adequate tools or interventions for someone in his condition. The Louisville Metro Police Department officially closed the case in 2023 after completing their investigation and released the full investigative file to the public. The case raised difficult questions about the intersection of mental health treatment and weapon access. From a stated message about access to a mystery that remains largely unsolved. Hu Can Tran. Hu Can Tran was 72 years old on January 21, 2023, when he entered the Star Ballroom Dance Studio in Monterey Park, California. The dance studio was hosting a celebration for Lunar New Year, a significant cultural event for the Asian American community in the area. Tran had been born in Vietnam in 1950 and had immigrated to the United States at some point in his life, eventually settling in the California area. He had worked as a truck driver for many years and had been a patron of dance studios in the Monterey Park area for an extended period, participating in the social dance community. People who knew Tran described him as having a quick temper and being someone who could become angry easily over perceived slights or conflicts. His ex-wife later confirmed in interviews that Tran had issues with anger throughout their relationship, and that this had been a persistent characteristic. Acquaintances noted that Tran seemed to harbor resentments and could be distrustful of others in the dance community. The specific motivation for Tran's actions remained unclear even after extensive investigation by multiple law enforcement agencies. Some who knew Tran suggested he may have had disputes with people at the dance studios over dance-related matters or social interactions, or may have been experiencing paranoia about being mistreated or excluded. However, just no definitive explanation emerged for why he chose to carry out the attack on that particular night during the Lunar New Year celebration. Investigators interviewed numerous people who had interacted with Tran at the dance studios, but none could point to a specific triggering event. Tran entered the Star Ballroom carrying a Cobra M119 semi-automatic pistol equipped with a homemade illegal suppressor that he had manufactured himself. He opened fire on the people who were gathered for the Lunar New Year celebration, targeting random individuals who were dancing and socializing at the event. 11 people lost their lives in the attack, and 9 others sustained injuries of varying severity. The victims were members of the local Asian American community who had gathered to celebrate an important cultural holiday together. After the shooting at the Star Ballroom, Tran left that location and drove to a second dance studio called Lai Lai Ballroom in a nearby community with apparent plans to continue. He attempted to enter that studio as well, apparently intending to carry out a second attack. However, a single individual, 26-year-old Brandon Say, whose family owned the Lai Lai Ballroom, acted alone to wrestle the weapon away from Tran during a life-and-death struggle. After being disarmed at the second location, Tran fled in his vehicle. Law enforcement launched a search for Tran and eventually located his vehicle. When police surrounded the vehicle and attempted to take Tran into custody peacefully, a standoff situation developed that lasted for hours. During the standoff, Tran took his own life. Because Tran passed away before being questioned by authorities, investigators had to piece together his possible motivations from interviews with people who had known him. The sheriff overseeing the investigation described Tran using strong language that reflected the senseless nature of the attack. Despite extensive investigation, the case remained one where the full motivation was never definitively established. There have been no significant updates to the case since 2023, as Tran's passing prevented any legal proceedings from taking place. The attack remains notable as one targeting a cultural celebration in a community gathering space. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.